Today's webinar is on the subject of executive presence, which I know is a really hot topic right now, and we're happy to bring this to you. Our presenter, Amy Gardner, is a former practicing lawyer. She has been certified as a career development and career transitions coach. So she spends quite a bit of time talking about how to improve your practice and how to improve your confidence at the same time. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Amy and we'll go from there.
Great, thank you. It looks like I'm on here twice. Can you kick off that second me? I'm not sure what that's all about.
Okay, I'm going to kick.
All right,
one of you left.
Perfect, but it was the right one too. I'm not sure how that happened, so sorry about that. So let's jump in and start up the slides and see how this goes. There we go. All right. Okay, so as Dana said, we're going to talk about enhanced executive presence for lawyers today. And hopefully you can all see the slides and Dana and I, is that right?
Yeah, they should be able to see, at least that's what I'm seeing. I've got your slides on the main screen and both of our faces down in the corner. Okay,
so as Dana said, I'm a career transitions coach and career development coach, and I work almost 100% of my time with lawyers, but I'm actually in business with my husband, Keith Spirrell. And as he often says, that executive presence is more important than you think and more achievable than you realize. And we're going to talk today about whether or not he's right. So today we're going to be focused on 4 main points. We're going to talk about why your executive presence may be the #1 factor that either holds you back or propels you forward. We're going to talk about the factors that make up executive presence and which ones are within you that you have agency to change. We're going to talk about 3 action items that you can take today to improve or enhance your executive presence. And then we'll talk about some additional free tools and resources that you can use to transform your executive presence beyond today's program. So first off, what is executive presence and why does it matter? And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on what executive presence is if you want to weigh in on the chat.
Well, I was going to say, when you first brought this subject up to me, I really had not heard that buzzword before, and I was confused a little bit about what that meant. And so I admit, I did a little Google search to figure out what it was you were talking about. And then I come to realize that it was something that was quite important, so I'm really glad that you brought it up as a topic to talk about.
Good. And we'll talk about the fact that I didn't know what executive presence was at all until I was more or less told I didn't have any when I worked at Sken, so right out of law school. So we'll talk about that. So let's see what people think about what executive presence is and why it matters. Nobody's weighed in quite yet.
Well, tell us your story about
sure. So
how you first heard about it.
Yeah, so let's jump into executive presence, and I'll tell you a little bit more about my background in a sec. So executive presence is made up of leadership ability, speaking skills, ability to command a room, appearance, assertiveness, your ability to read a room, your sense of humor, your body language. Confidence is certainly a part of good executive presence, emotional intelligence, decisiveness, integrity, reputation, vision, charisma, and ability to determine appropriate presence for the role that you have or the thing that you're doing at that time. So all those are factors. So as I mentioned, I really learned about executive presence when I was a new associate at Sken. So straight out of law school, I spent about 6 years at Sken's Chicago office, and I was in many respects doing great. I was doing good work. I was getting good reviews. I was billing, the bazillion hours a year I was supposed to be billing. And yet something was still not quite off. It seemed like the first few months I was there, the only time I got to go to court was if I was carrying a box of documents for someone. And I wasn't getting invited to meetings with clients. And one day a partner said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Sure," because what other option does a Sken associate have when a partner asks a question? And he said, "Why are you always so stressed?" And I said, "Well, I'm not. Why?" And he said, "Well, your face is always flushed, you're always walking fast, and you always have papers flying everywhere." And so I did what any dutiful Sken associate would do. I got some face powder and put it in my desk. I started walking more slowly down the hallway and got manila file folders. And somehow I thought that was going to solve everything. And perhaps unsurprisingly, it did not. But then I started working for a female partner who some folks on the call today may know, Tina Chen. And it's showing that there we go. Thank you. And when I started working for Tina, I saw that she was very different than I was in terms of when she walked into a room, people believed that she belonged there. And when Tina spoke, people were actually listening to her. And of course, some of that was because she was a partner and I was a mere associate. But I realized it was more than that. And that's when I learned about executive presence. And since that time, and part of it was, to be fair, just the way that I was very stressed and showing it, but a lot of it was executive presence. And so since that time, then I left Skadden, became an associate and partner at another firm, became the dean of students at the U of C Law School. And through all of that was learning more about executive presence, and actually ended up teaching executive presence to law school students as part of the leadership and professionalism programming that I put together. So later on, I'll tell you what happened last summer and why I realized that I had gotten pretty good at this executive presence thing. But hopefully that shares a little bit of where I started out from, because I certainly did not start out knowing what executive presence was or what to do to make mine better.
So Amy, can I interject a quick question?
Yeah.
Do you then feel like it's something that is trainable or practicable, that you develop as you gain more experience or as you practice some exercises? Or do you feel like some people are just naturally born with some sort of gift? And, you know, what are your thoughts on that?
I 100% believe that it's something that you can work on. I think there are certain things, certain professionalism and leadership skills that some people know better than others, because maybe you have a mentor who teaches you some of these things, or maybe you went to a school or law school that taught you more about some of these things. But definitely executive presence is one of those things that I think can make a big difference in your career, and that a little bit of effort can help with. And certainly if you put more effort into it, then you can be really great at it. So let's actually go to a poll, because you raise a great question. So I'd love to hear what folks attending think, if they feel like you either have executive presence or you don't.
Okay, so hopefully on the right side of your screen, you should see a poll that you could vote on, and then we will leave it up for a few minutes and then end the poll and share the results. So while that's up for a few minutes, Amy, why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So it looks like people have started voting. So that's great. I'm just curious to see what you think. I'm
sorry to interrupt. I think John had written the comment that he feels executive presence is having command of a courtroom.
Yeah, certainly. I think if you have good executive presence, you're going to feel more comfortable having command of a courtroom. I think you also, you don't have to be the kind of person who wants to command the courtroom to be able to be a better lawyer by enhancing your executive presence too. I think it, as we'll talk about, having better executive presence can help you in court, but it can also help you when you're meeting with clients and trying to get them to feel confident in your abilities. So I think there's a lot of ways that it can come into play for lawyers.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I do go to court in my practice, but I don't go as often as straight litigator tends to. And I find that in my practice, because my clients need to have a lot of trust in me, in that I'm going to handle their situation, that they're looking for some sort of calming effect that I may have. So I completely agree with you.
Yeah, you just want to, you want to be able to instill confidence in your abilities, and you want clients to have faith in you. So it looks like most people say that executive presence is just like any other skill, but a substantial number think you either have it or you don't, and it's nearly impossible to change. Which I kind of question then if you would really be spending an hour with us if you didn't believe that you could learn something and improve your executive presence. But we'll see if I can change your mind in the course of our hour together. So thank you for answering that, and we'll just put up one other one. Let's see. There we go. And this is, how would you rank your current executive presence? And your options range from fantastic, I'm good at it, to solid, I wish I showed up better, I need a lot of work, or all the way to what is executive presence. So we'll see what folks think there.
Yeah, while that one is up, could you give us some examples that you can describe how executive presence has impacted you? So maybe something you've seen, or maybe one of your clients, how you've seen them transition?
Yeah, so we actually the reason that we started offering executive presence as one of we actually have an in-person curriculum that we work through with people, and that's now formed the basis of this electronic course that we just launched this week on executive presence. Our very first executive presence client, she reached out and said she thought she needed communication help. And it wasn't communication at all. I mean, communication is part of executive presence, but what happened to her was she was told that she was getting, there was a promotion that came up. She asked to be considered, and they said no. And she said, well, why not? And they said, well, a lot of public speaking is involved in this position. And this is a lawyer in Chicago, so I'm trying to be very careful to not give away any details. But she said, well, why would you not? And they said, because there's this public speaking. And she said, but I haven't done any public speaking in this role. How do you know that I can't do public speaking? And they said, well, we've seen you in meetings. And I think people make assumptions that if you might be totally confident in court and great in court, but if during meetings you're sitting there not taking up any space, not contributing, hesitant to sit at the table, those sorts of things, not willing to speak up when somebody points at you to speak on a conference call, those sorts of things, then people assume you're not going to be able to handle bigger stages like court or a press conference or things like that. And actually, so Keith began creating this program. She went through the program, and she then a few weeks later, not that much longer later, was speaking at an event. And I went to see her speak because it was a women's event, and it was going to be a little obvious if Keith showed up. And so I went, and I was videotaping her surreptitiously for him. And I texted him during it. And I think the text was something like, holy crap, I don't know what you did to her, but this is freaking amazing. Because it really was night and day. And like many workplaces, especially now, it took a long time for them to hire to fill the promotion. And she ended up getting the promotion.
Oh, and that's good.
It was kind of fantastic because the salary increase more than paid for. Our normal executive presence curriculum is $7,500. The course, as we'll talk about, is much, much less than that. But her salary increase much
more than that. So it was a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, but I think you really can. And she's a great example of how if you work on executive presence, it's not brain surgery. We do, as lawyers, we do so many harder things than enhancing our executive presence. So it's definitely something you can improve. So people, it looks like for the ranking, we've got a couple folks who say, I'm fantastic or I'm solid. Other folks say, I wish I showed up better. So it looks like we're a 60-40 split. So good deal.
Yeah.
Well,
and if you guys could just jump into the chat and let me know if you see those results, that would be great. Because I have a viewpoint as a moderator from the dashboard side, but I'm not quite sure if you guys can also see those results posted.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump back in. Okay. There we go. So we talked about those poll questions. So here are just a couple additional ways of defining executive presence. Executive presence is often referred to as political skill, but then there are other people who consider executive presence to be one political skill, and that'd be politics with a small p. And so when this definition of political skill is the ability to effectively understand people and influence them to act in ways that benefit our personal goals, our employer's goals, or both. And obviously, again, you have to have executive presence to be able to do that. Another definition of executive presence is the ability to project mature self-confidence, a sense you can take control of difficult, unpredictable situations, make tough decisions in a timely way, and hold your own with other talented and strong-willed people. And when I first read this definition years ago, I actually flagged it and marked it. It's in a Harvard Business Review article that's really become one of the main or seminal pieces on executive presence, and that's actually in your supplementary materials that you can access in the written materials for today's program. But when you read that, I mean, what lawyer is that not describing, or who does not want to be described as someone who can project mature self-confidence, hold our own with other talented and strong-willed people, given who we work with all day, every day? I mean, are there any people that we work with who are not talented and strong-willed people, at least whether it's opposing counsel or judges or clients. That's basically who we're all working with. So executive presence, why does it matter for lawyers? And as I've talked about, you have to have, when you have good executive presence, you are more successful in court because you feel more comfortable in court. You're taken more seriously by your opposing counsel. It's easier for you to instill confidence in your clients. So it's hard to imagine how you can be a really successful lawyer if you don't have executive presence that you've at least worked on, or that's at least good executive presence. Now, of course, CLE, we want to talk about how executive presence meshes with our obligations as a lawyer and the Illinois Rules of Professional Conduct. And if you look in the Illinois Rules of Professional Conduct, you're not going to find any place that says lawyers have to have good executive presence, right? You're not going to find any place that really talks about the skills lawyers need to be successful. But there are several places actually in the preamble which lay out things that lawyers have to be able to do. And it's hard to imagine that having good executive presence doesn't make you better at them. So for example, in the preamble, it talks about lawyers as advisors and how we provide an informed understanding of the client's legal rights and obligations and explain practical implications. Obviously, if you are able to instill confidence in your clients, it's going to be easier for you to explain things to them. The preamble talks about lawyers serving as third-party neutrals, helping parties resolve a dispute or other matter. And again, having good executive presence makes that easier for you, because if you as the neutral express a viewpoint in a way that is not clearly communicated, in a way that is not assertive, it's going to be hard for the parties to really reach a resolution if they don't believe a word you're saying. It also says that lawyers should be competent, prompt, and diligent. And part of being competent is having executive presence so that you can advocate on the client's behalf. And finally, the Illinois Rules of Professional Conduct preamble says that a lawyer should further the public's understanding of and confidence in the rule of law and the justice system. And if you think back to that first-year associate at Skadden with the papers flying and the flushed face and the walking fast even to the bathroom, it's hard to imagine that that lawyer was really going to be able to further anyone's confidence in the rule of law and the justice system. So hopefully that helps you put into context why executive presence matters for lawyers, particularly if we want to be ethical lawyers meeting our obligations. So let's jump back a step to talk about the elements of executive presence. And we've talked about some definitions and some of the things, but this is from a study that was done of hundreds of C-suite executives. And they were asked what they're evaluating to see whether someone has good executive presence. And I think we often think of executive presence as, somebody who has a spray tan and a new suit and shiny shoes. And as you can see, that's not what we're getting at, and that's not what executives are thinking of when they're evaluating your executive presence. So just 5% of their judgment of your executive presence comes down to how you look. So obviously you want to be appropriately dressed and groomed, but that's not the only factor or even close to the most important.
Wow, sorry, I just wanted to cut right in because I'm surprised by that number. I would have guessed the number would have been higher. I feel like I take a lot more stock in that first visual appearance. Just wondering if what the viewers think as well. Pop an answer in the chat what you think about that.
And I can tell you that I have not done this full scale study myself, but I did do an executive presence program for law students a few years ago where I asked them, what are you looking at? And my results were very close. And I was working with female law students, but still their appearance was a little bigger, but it was not, I believe appearance ended up being like 8 or 9%. So certainly not as scientific as this study was, but I do think that we assume that appearance is a lot of it. But once you get past the initial hurdle of not looking unkempt, then it becomes much more about these other factors of communication and gravitas. And as we'll talk about, they are all really interrelated. If you're wearing a wrinkled suit or you find yourself in a polo shirt and shorts and everyone else is in a tuxedo, it's going to be hard to show any gravitas. It's going to be hard to feel confident communicating. So they do all play together. But I wonder, what did people say in the chat?
Yeah, we've got some answers coming through. that a couple of them were also surprised that it was such a small number. Constance made a comment that, voice and posture can really send a signal, and I definitely agree with that. So perhaps visually you have a cue, but within the first minute or minutes, your voice or your posture or your body language can quickly change and outweigh the visual appearance. And maybe that's where those numbers, what those numbers are reflecting.
Yeah. And I have to say that I think, I think this is my third webinar this week, Sarah. I've never had anyone say, sorry, I didn't answer the poll question. I was busy kneading rye bread, but that is the best ever. So I think you should get a gold star or something for that one. All right. So basically, though, how you look, communication, gravitas, in that order, from least to most important. And on all three of those, I hope if you remember nothing else from today, you remember that you have agency. Right? You have agency to make sure that you are dressed appropriately. You have agency to improve your communication. And as we'll talk about, you can improve your gravitas. So all of these, to a really large extent, are within your control to improve. So let's break these down a little more. Communication, it obviously is made up of speaking skills, your ability to command a room, assertiveness, ability to read a room, sense of humor, and body language, as was mentioned earlier. And we'll talk in a moment about specific considerations with everyone on Zoom and video right now, but body language is one of those things that has become more difficult now that we're all on Zoom, and we'll talk about that a little more. The second category, gravitas, so the elements that make that up are confidence, decisiveness, integrity, emotional intelligence, reputation, vision, and charisma. And as you can see, those are all really interrelated. So if you feel confident, it's going to be easier for you to be decisive and make a decision. If you have good integrity, you're more likely to have a good reputation. If you are confident, you're going to likely higher in emotional intelligence. If you have good self-awareness, that would be higher emotional intelligence. So all of those really go together. Now, Christy Hedges, who wrote one of the really important books on presence that you'll see in the supplemental materials, said if you want to be seen as trusted and credible, your actions must be in alignment with your intentions, both stated and unstated. It's the only way to be received with clarity. So in other words, again, all of these factors that go into executive presence are all really tied together. And what that means is that if you improve a factor or two, then you're going to be able to really influence your executive presence. So I mentioned there are some special considerations for executive presence on video, and so I want to share those with you now. And some of these you may already have figured out, but I think some of them bear repeating based on the fact that I work with lawyers all day, every day, and I see these every day. So the first one is to look up and at the camera. And that I just was on a networking event the other day where the vast majority of people had their camera down here, which means you're looking up at their nose and they're like the fan coming out of their head, like a propeller. So all you have to do is just lift up your laptop, lift up your computer screen, use some books, use a box, whatever. You do not have to have an $800 standing desk to be able to lift your computer up. So just take a moment to do that. And you want to be looking up at the camera a little bit. It just helps a lot with how you're coming across. You want to rethink your background. And I think that in March, people were kind of just, okay, got to get in there, got to get to work, whatever. And now there's the point where people are expecting a little bit more professional background. And that can be a little ridiculous and frustrating. If you're trying to get, 7-year-olds to sit down and do their schoolwork and be on video with a client, you might be thinking, are you kidding me? I have to worry about the background too. But the reality is that you want your clients and your opposing counsel to think of you as professional now and after this is all over. And so taking a moment to put a more professional background behind you really does make a difference. I actually interviewed someone for a job not too long ago who was in a basement and she had all these mannequins behind her, like dress forms. And it was horrifying because all I could think about was that she was like someone from CSI or something, and they were going to find dead bodies in her basement. Right? You do not want to be the person where someone says, oh, that's interesting. What's behind you? Right? The other day I was on Zoom with somebody who they had this beautiful painting behind them, but all I could see was the feet of the person who was in the painting. So it's basically just feet and then the attorney's head. Like, don't do that. So do take a moment.
On that note, I think that some of us have become a little more conditioned to look around in the background too, because we have been using a lot more social media than we ever have before. And what happens with social media? You see pictures and you don't just look at the subject, because it's not a picture that you just flip to the side real quick. You kind of look around the whole picture. You're looking to see what's in the corner. And I think that kind of plays into it. Now that we're all doing a lot more time on video, we also tend to just look at the whole window screen. So I agree with you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was on a Zoom call maybe 4 weeks ago with a vendor who we use actually, and their expansion plans for the next 2 years were on the whiteboard behind him.
Oh.
And for me, it was fine, but a lot of people, I think, would have taken a screenshot of that. I live not too far from the Roadie corporate office, and they have a whiteboard in the window that had all their new menu ideas on it. And it was clearly visible walking down the street, right? So you do want to pay attention to not just, is there laundry behind me, but do I have a whiteboard, or do I have notes that could be seen? So you want to pay attention to that. You also want to look only at the meeting. And I know that that's tricky, but particularly if you wear glasses, you should know that if you're looking at Facebook, everyone else knows it, right? We can see the reflection in your glasses. So you want to think about those sorts of things. And it's really hard because you need to be looking at the camera. If you're looking at like if I'm looking at Dana right now, you know that I'm not looking at the camera, right? But it's so unnatural to stand here and just look at a camera. So you want to think about those things, about where you're looking and how that looks, because you don't want your client to think that you're shifty, right? If you're looking around all the time, that's not the impression you're trying to make. You also want to frame yourself so that you don't have too much space above your head or too little space. You don't want to cut off your head. You also want to exercise caution with the chat. So when I left the University of Chicago Law School, I worked for a national legal nonprofit, and most of us were remote. So I was managing remote staff, and a lot of my colleagues were remote all over the country. And I cannot tell you how many times I would be on a meeting and someone would intend to message just one coworker and say something like, hey, how was your weekend? Or how long do you think this effing meeting's going to last? And they would accidentally send it to people who were not just the person they thought they were talking to. More than once, that happened with multiple people in a team meeting. Fortunately, I was never leading the team meeting, and I was never the one who did it. But holy smokes, be careful. And know that some platforms, they say that the host cannot see the private chats. Ask yourself how much you believe that, right? Like, we all believed that Facebook had certain privacy protections too. So really stop and think before you type anything in a chat that you do not want everyone on the meeting to see. And also know that people can save the chat. So really do be careful about what you're putting in the chat. You also want to be careful. Sorry, go ahead, Dana.
I was going to say, speaking of the chat, we got a question in here.
Oh, good.
Sarah asked, she stated she can think of 2 occasions where she was seen as not in charge as much as someone else. And she says, because I knew we needed more information before making a decision. So it sounds like she's saying she may have come off as hesitant because she felt she needed more information. And her question is, well, how are you seen as decisive in that sort of situation?
I think there that the key to seeming or coming across as decisive is making clear what information is needed. So if you can say, I think we need to know the number, the amount of damages, or how many school buses were involved, or whatever it is, be very specific, then it makes it clear that you're not just kicking the can down the road. You need this information, and then once you have that information, you have it. Another way you could do that is say, if we find ABC, then we will know that we need to do DEF, and if we find XYZ, we'll know that we need to do 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I could see how that would make a difference, because you're verbalizing your rationale, which is then giving you credibility for the decision at hand. And perhaps if you're not verbalizing any rationale, then you may come off, or someone may interpret that as, you're not in charge.
Yeah, and so I think it's clear, if you can make it clear what more you need, that would probably be helpful. So Nancy, I see too, said, how about the person who forgets to mute, takes another phone call with clients confidentially? Yeah, so there you want to do everything you can to alert the person. If you're running the meeting, though, so we do a lot on Zoom. Just today, we were running a Get Stuff Done session with clients and other folks who participated in our. We do twice a week cocktail hours and we've been doing them during COVID. And so we opened it up to basically a lot of folks on our email list to come into the sort of study hall situation for 3.5 hours to get stuff done. Anyway, as we're running that, there were people who forgot to mute themselves and they're typing away or they're listening to Coldplay or whatever. That's when you, as the organizer, if in the platform, you can go in and mute people. And I think you want to remind people of that, but you also want to do them a favor and mute them so that they don't embarrass themselves. But it's a lot like in real life, right? I was once at Frontera Grill when an attorney at the table next to me was trying to impress his date by going on and on about their settlement strategy. But what the attorney at Jenner did not know was that I, as the attorney at Skadden, knew who was on the other side. So these things happen in real life too. But certainly you can lean over and say to somebody in person, but it's a little trickier when you're on video and in these virtual situations. And there, I think you want to mute them, do them the favor, and then let them know what they did wrong.
Yeah, a quick reminder might be a good part of that practice. I mean, even if I go to the movies, every time when they say turn off your ringer, I'm always pulling out my phone because I forget.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so as the meeting host, you're right, you could offer a reminder to people. And then finally, the body language thing, you want to be careful. I mean, right now, so I can't see anybody except for Dana. So I don't know, are people passed out in their chairs? Maybe. I think it's almost a bigger risk when you can see people and you think you know their body language, right? So if you can only see this, you have no idea what I'm doing with my hands. You can interpret where I'm looking, right? You can interpret me as shifty-eyed rather than just looking at Dana or looking at the camera. So you want to be careful that you aren't filling in the gaps when you're interpreting other people's body language, but also be aware that other people have less data to interpret yours. And one more point on this, we've seen a lot of research you probably have seen about Zoom and Zoom fatigue. And that's because your brain, if you're looking at the Hollywood Squares setup and you're looking at a meeting of 15 people, your brain is trying so hard to process the body language and understand what's going on. It just wears you out. So what I suggest is, like for a program like this, you want to just have the speaker up. And if you're doing a meeting where someone's giving a presentation, do it in the speaker view versus a discussion where you're doing gallery view. And I think you also want to be more cognizant than ever if you're organizing a meeting on Zoom, who really needs to be there so that you are not having extraneous people that you're trying to keep track of. So I think you want to keep all of those in mind when you're on video. Particularly in these times too, there are 4 things that I want to suggest you keep in mind. You want to make sure that you're just as prepared or more prepared for meetings right now. I think we've seen that people assume that because it's not in person, they can have their materials at the ready, they can have documents open on their screen and refer back to them, things like that. And you can, but you should also know that it generally is obvious that that's what you're doing. So you should really think about it as how can you be as prepared as you would be for an in-person meeting. You also want to remember that energetic right now can come across as frenetic because so many people are stressed out. On the flip side, though, if you are doing a presentation like this one, for example, you have to remember that the video is taking away anywhere, depends on who you believe, but anywhere from 10 to 50% of your energy is just getting lost because you don't have the energy of a live audience to feed off of. So you have to show up as more energetic, but again, you don't want to come across as just flustered and kooky.
Well, that's a super interesting point because you're right. You do feed off of energy in a live meeting, whether it's a meeting with 1 person or 5 people. I certainly feel that. I think everybody can relate. And when you're doing meetings through the lens, you do kind of have a little bit of a energy loss.
Yeah. One thing that I've been doing is for the last probably 3 years, I only ever had pop on airplanes. That was like my one time that I would have pop. Otherwise, I just drink iced tea. And during the pandemic, I started drinking 1 Diet Dr. Pepper a day. I feel like it's the least I should get out of this. And now what I do is I've been doing a lot of webinars like this. And so whenever I have a webinar, I have a second can of Diet Dr. Pepper. And that I am confident it is 99.7% just psychological, but somehow thinking I have twice the caffeine as normal helps me be more energetic for these types of things. Because as Mark says, yep, the Zoom fatigue is definitely real. And it's just a different situation and processing that you're doing. You do want to be as professional as you can be. I actually was on a board meeting, a nonprofit board meeting the other day with my husband, who's also on the board. And a woman stood up during the meeting, and all of us who are watching the meeting, I swear to God, this is true, and I wish I had a screenshot. She was not wearing pants. She had on underwear, but she did not have pants on. And yes, and I am immediately getting all caps texts from Keith, and I'm just sitting there. I had to start chugging my water so I wouldn't laugh, and at least have it be visible that I was laughing in this meeting, right? And so you do want to be, she's talking about this great proposal and this great idea she had, and then we all see bare legs, right? You do want to think through those sorts of things about how you're going to be professional, even in a crazy situation. And again, you want to be intentional about how you want to show up during that. I was just working with a client today who's giving a really important presentation next week. And so we went through, and she decided she wants to come across as professional, knowledgeable, and engaging. And so we backed out from those, what she needs to do to show up that way. And you want to do that, I think, even more so now when you don't have the pre-meeting chit chat to create an impression. You don't have the post-meeting chit chat to soften any hard edges that came out of the meeting. So I think it's even more important when we have these limited meetings on Zoom, or you're trying to manage a stressed out staff over Zoom and the phone. It's even more important than ever that you be really intentional.
Well, that is an interesting point about identifying the goal of the meeting as connected to the purpose, because I know that myself, I will feel different in different clothes, in different hairstyles, different shoes, even for me personally. And so, like you said, you'll feel different if you drink Diet Dr. Pepper. So I'm sure everybody has little things that they know can maybe make them feel a certain way. And if you're trying to come off a certain way and you identify that, and then you tag back to what can I do to myself or my setting or my communication to achieve that goal, that's a different way of looking at it than just kind of showing up in your normal routine.
I mean, I could be wearing a shirt and you wouldn't know it, but I'm not. I'm wearing a dress. I do have tennis shoes on. Because otherwise heels click on the floor and just make bad noise. But I mean, I could be standing here in a shirt and shorts and bare feet, right? And you wouldn't necessarily know. But I don't, because that's not how I want to show up. And I know how that makes me feel about myself and what I'm doing if that's what I wear. But Mark did note that maybe he's doing it wrong if he's wearing pants at home. I would argue the fact that you're not doing it wrong, Mark. I think it's probably a pretty good idea. And Nancy, yes, the beginning of the text, every text between my husband and I during this was OMG. So yes, that was basically our reaction. So a real life example from just this week of why you should not go pantless on Zoom meetings if anyone needed a reason to not do that. All right, so let's talk about 3 actions that you can take today to start enhancing your executive presence. So the first one is to be open to feedback. And this can be really tricky, especially when, as lawyers, we've worked so hard to get where we are, and we all feel like we're doing okay, right? So it can be tricky. But one way to get feedback is to have yourself videotaped. And it's easier than ever if you're on video, because you can just tape your team meeting. You can just record it and then watch the recording. You can actually just record yourself if you're making an oral argument or practicing an oral argument, and watch that video back. There is nothing that provides you with clearer feedback than seeing yourself on video. So I really recommend that. The second is to inquire, which means just to ask. Ask your associate, ask your paralegal, ask your co-counsel, ask your spouse what they think about how you perform, whether it's leading a nonprofit board meeting, or if it's they're listening, or they're overhearing a conversation you're having with opposing counsel, or a hearing that you're doing on the phone. But ask people for feedback. The third thing is to speak. And I know that for a lot of lawyers, it's funny how we're comfortable in court, but we don't want to have to give a speech or things like that. But especially right now, this is a great opportunity to do a panel for a bar committee, to reach out to Dana and offer to do a CLE, to try to get more speaking experience, because the more you do, the better you're going to get at it. And of course, public speaking is just one piece of executive presence, but it's an easy one to work on. You also want to think about developing situational intentions. And that's what I talked about before with thinking about, how do I want to show up in this? I encourage clients to actually go through your calendar for the next day and write down how you want to show up in each thing. And so maybe that's a call with your ex about childcare drop off, or dropping off the kids. And you want to show up as patient, right? You write that down. If it's a meeting with a client where you want to show up as confident and knowledgeable, you write that down. And then you review it beforehand as a reminder of how you want to come across. And then afterwards, you look back and think, did you do it or not? And that sort of after action review can give you really helpful data to see, are you showing up the way you want? And that's another piece of data, another piece of feedback that can be helpful. And then finally, on our website on Apochromatik.com, we have a whole series of blog posts about feedback and how to get more feedback. Because one of the things that I've seen is when you're good at your job, people always just say, oh yeah, you did fine. Oh no, that was great. And you have to learn to dig into the feedback to say, oh, I'm so glad to hear that. What did I do that was especially good? And then when they tell you something, you say, oh, and what should I do differently next time? Because if you just take, oh, it was great, or oh, it was fine, you're not going to learn anything, which means you're not going to improve. And when you ask, you're not putting the feedback in their head. They're already thinking it. The only difference is now you're going to know what they're thinking. So I really encourage you to dig into feedback and to try to get feedback and be open to receiving it when people do offer it to you so that you can start to improve. Action 2 is to manage the way you're perceived. And there are things that we can do. We have quite a bit of control over what's online about us. In particular, almost always the number one search result for people is their LinkedIn profile. And the number of times I encounter lawyers who always, they have it all together, it seems. And then you go to their LinkedIn profile and the picture, they're wearing sunglasses on the top of their head. They don't have a banner photo, which is basically just giving up free advertising and not taking advantage of it. Last week, I looked for 3 different people whose contact information, and all 3 of them had contact information from a job or 2 ago. So if recruiters are trying to find you, if clients are trying to find you on LinkedIn, and they're trying to contact you, you're making it harder for them. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot and really undercutting the having it together impression that most of us are trying to put out on LinkedIn. So you want to look at that. You also want to look at all of your social media. The number of times, I'm sure you've had this experience, you look at somebody's LinkedIn and they have one image, and then you look other places and you're thinking, is this the same person? I actually was on a search committee for a position at the University of Chicago where I thought we were going to make an offer to someone for sure. And it turned out that their LinkedIn or the Facebook profile said Californian for life or something like that. And people were like, they're not going to move to Chicago for a job if their Facebook profile says that, right? So you want to think about what all of your social media is saying about you, and consider your profile pictures in particular, whether you shouldn't just have the same profile picture for everything. And then finally, consider an emotional intelligence assessment. There's free ones you can find online. With our clients, we use the EQI 2.0, which is the Emotional Quotient Inventory 2.0. We like that one because it's normed, but there are lots of different ones. Everything from BuzzFeed through more scientific options that you can take advantage of. So think about whether one of those assessments might be helpful. And the final action is to develop your personal presence brand. And we're going to do that in just a second here to start that process. But you want to start thinking about what impact you make on the world through your personal impact statement, and then your personal presence brand, and then your personal power introduction. To be clear, none of these are intended to replace your elevator pitch, but the idea is to start thinking about yourself and what you bring, and then that feeds into the narrative you tell about yourself on LinkedIn, that you tell about yourself to potential clients, that you tell about yourself on your website. So that's why all of this can be really helpful. So before we go into, and Nancy said, I worry about how many times I've on Facebook clicked the angry button to a Trump post. Yeah, I've been using a lot of snooze lately on Facebook for friends and family alike, so that I don't see their posts for 30 days. And you have to decide, right, what's important to you. If you're an immigration lawyer, is it bad for you to like a post that says, something about immigration? Probably not, right? Depending on where you stand.
Well, also, do you advise people to go through the trouble of maintaining 2 separate profiles? Or do you think it's better to just make a decision from the onset? I'm going to keep my profile personal and open, but I'm going to restrict who I'm connected with, or I'm going to, you know, broaden it, but then maybe restrict some of my, you know, opinions.
You can do all of those things. I don't think any of them really work. I think you're better off having one profile and remembering that the judge that you're in front of and the Wall Street Journal can see anything you put on Facebook, because even if you have a small group, you can't stop people from doing a screenshot, right? You can change the privacy settings so that a juror can't see it, but that doesn't mean that, you know, their cousin who you went to high school with isn't going to see it and share it with them. Okay. So I really recommend that if you're putting it on the internet, you should assume people can see it. I mean, here's an example. My husband tweets almost never, but he used to go to this conference every year where you were supposed to tweet. And so he had a Twitter account because of that. And we were on a flight coming back from Hawaii to LA to Chicago. So a long, long flight. And about an hour into the very first flight, the guy behind me puked all over our row, primarily on me. It was a great, great flight. And the flight attendant's response was, get a napkin. So he was thrilled. So when we landed in LA, Keith tweeted, American Airlines passenger barfed on my wife. Flight attendant response, get a napkin. Unacceptable. You know, it was this many miles for the ticket. What are you going to do about it? That kind of thing. And it wasn't like irate even, but he said barfed. And he then was a finalist for a job maybe a year later. And this was like 5 years ago, right? Even more. And the recruiter said, hey, look, when we did the background check, a tweet came up that you got to get rid of. And he had no idea what she was even talking about. And she had to say, you shouldn't say barf on Twitter. And so if barf on Twitter was offensive and an issue, you know, 6 years ago or whatever it was.
That's just the reality of the world we live in.
Right. So you do, I guess maybe he should have said vomited. I don't know. But you do want to think about those things because, like I said, he never tweeted, and yet that was out there. So I think you want to be careful. And Mark says, you know, assume everyone can see it. I think that's about right. I don't think you can trust the privacy controls or any of that. So let's move on to this exercise. We're going to just take a few minutes to do this. The idea is you're going to list 3 strengths and then how each strength adds value for employers or clients. And you're going to make that into your personal impact statement. And this is a longer process that we do with clients, but I want to get you started into it today so that you can start to see how you can improve your executive presence. So let me just give you an example. If I was a bus driver, I might say my 3 strengths are I'm enthusiastic, I'm careful, and I'm always in a good mood. Then for how each strength adds value, I might say, I greet everyone with enthusiasm, I brighten their day, I get my passengers to their destination safely, and I never let my mood be influenced by anybody else's bad day. So then you would say, I am an enthusiastic, careful, and always in a good mood bus driver. As a result, I greet everyone with enthusiasm, get my passengers to their destinations safely, and never let my mood be influenced by other people's issues. So think about your strengths and how they add value, and then put that statement together. And we'll take a couple minutes to do that. Did you have a question though, Dana?
Yeah, Amy, do you recommend that you view yourself and then possibly ask your spouse or your best friend to just identify your 3 strengths and maybe see if those 3 things line up?
Yep, that's actually one of our suggested action items, is to do what we call inspiration phone calls. So absolutely, I think that could be really useful to call somebody and say, how do I inspire you? And then think through that, because that's a good way to get them thinking about your strengths. And that when you say, how do I inspire you, they think bigger than what are my strengths.
And when you have people working this exercise, do you ever find that someone identifies their strengths, but maybe they say, you know, I recognize I have these strengths, but I would like these other strengths?
Absolutely, yeah. It's an important moment for self-reflection, and it really gets in that self-awareness that's part of emotional intelligence. And I think as you think about your strengths, it's important to be honest with yourself. Where are you now, and where would you like to be? Yeah. So let's just take maybe 2-3 minutes and get started. Just write out your 3 strengths, how each adds value, and then you can work on making them into that personal impact statement. And this is just a rough draft. No one's going to put this on your tombstone today, but just hopefully this gets you thinking. So I'll put myself on mute and we'll give you 2 or 3 minutes. And maybe share in the chat when you're done so we have a sense. Okay, everybody. Hopefully this got you started working on your personal impact statement. You may just want to take a picture of that or just write down again. So you just want to list your 3 strengths, how each adds value, and then make that into a statement. And if you like, I know we're running short on time. When you have a draft, email it to me. I'm happy to take a look. Will not share this publicly. Happy to take a look and see what you come up with, and then jump on the phone with you and talk through what it says about you and how you might make your impact statement stronger and how you can apply that. What I often have clients do is once they have their impact statement really dialed in, go back to their LinkedIn profile, go back to their social media, go back to their firm bio, and start thinking about are they coming across that way? I see so often people's bios are just, I went to this law school, I did this, I did this, I did this, and their strengths aren't coming through. And your firm bio is where you're really advertising to your clients. So you're missing a big opportunity if you're not incorporating some of this into all of those places where clients are looking for you. So let's just move on. For our second exercise, we wanted to invite you to take this assessment at enhancedep.com. And what it does is it tells you where your executive presence falls and gives you a better sense of where you are. And then if you want, you can sign up to get tips to help you enhance your presence. But because we're running short on time, we don't want to shortchange the rest of the content. So maybe just take a picture of that. It's enhancedep.com, and you can take that at your leisure to see where your executive presence stands. All right, so additional resources. We do have written materials for you, and in order to get those, you can just go to apochromatik.com/friendly. And then you can download, there's a PDF file as well as links to books, TED Talks, some 1-minute videos that we've prepared on executive presence. So lots of other materials if you're interested in improving your presence. And as I mentioned before, one exercise I think is really useful is to ask someone how you inspire them. And often clients are like, oh my God, Amy, you cannot make me do this. This is going to be horrible. Who would I ask? And so often the people that they ask, they just call and say, can you give me 3 ways I inspire you? And you cannot text and ask this. You can text and schedule a call, but you can't ask for this over text. So often the person they ask thanks them for asking the question and says, I've wanted to tell you this for a long time. but you're really great at blah, blah, blah. So consider whether asking somebody who works for you, a coworker, your spouse, your sister, whatever, how you inspire them, how that could help you as you think about your own executive presence. So I encourage you to give that a try. And I know it'll feel weird, but it will not kill you. And it can really make a big difference to your relationship with them and your executive presence. Now, we do have, I mentioned before that we do have this 30 days to enhance executive presence, this virtual program. And if you're interested in that, there's information at that website. I encourage you to think about how you could show up differently as a lawyer if you had a better executive presence. So how your life and your practice might be different if you felt more confident when you were walking in to pitch a new client, or if you felt more unflappable and felt like people had more confidence in you when you were walking into a settlement negotiation, say. So if you feel like you could use help with your executive presence, take a look at 30 Days to Enhance DP. I don't know of any other online programs that help you enhance your presence. This is based on our in-person curriculum I mentioned before, the $7,500 curriculum. And what this does is you have 5 online modules that have videos and worksheets and assessments and tools, and then applications that you work on until you get to the next video. So 5 of those videos, 2 bonus modules. And right now, because this was supposed to be $997, but with everybody staying at home, we decided that's a lot to ask people to invest in themselves and their careers. And even though we know that people earn the money back in enhanced raises, enhanced compensation, just saving time, because imagine how much time you would save if you felt comfortable drawing better boundaries and having hard conversations. But even so, during the stay home order, it's $497. And there are a bunch of bonuses that you can see on the website, including one of those bonuses is you can upload 10 minutes of you leading a meeting or speaking, giving us a talk, practicing a closing argument, and get feedback on that. So it's a way to get feedback, as well as you get a LinkedIn assessment as one of the bonuses right now. And you get some one-on-one coaching too as a bonus. So check that out if you feel like you would like to work on improving your executive presence. And that's aposignup.com/30 days. And if you do sign up for that, send me an email or send Dana an email and let us know. And we're making a donation to Friendly Lawyers of 10% of the sign up. So Friendly Lawyers will get basically $50 for every person from Friendly Lawyers who decides to join the program. So.
Well, I just wanted to say, because we are coming up to the end of our hour, usually we do stay on for 5 or 10 minutes in case anybody had some personal questions that they wanted for the presenter. But for everybody who came on to get their CLE credit, I'm going to conclude the presentation. I'm going to thank you for joining us. I'm going to be emailing you with a survey as well as Amy's materials, and I'll need you to confirm your attendance, and then I'll send a certificate for your professional responsibility credit.
So I started off, yeah, so thank you if you need to run, but I started off telling you about how I got interested in executive presence when I was the associate at Skadden and couldn't figure out how I was different than the partner that everyone listened to. So fast forward to this past summer, I was on a plane from Wyoming to Chicago that was delayed about 4 hours. And anybody who travels a lot has had this experience where they swap out a different plane, which means the boarding passes are all a disaster. So I get on the plane and 2 different people are assigned my seat. And so I'm there first, fortunately. And it turns out that all the seats around me were double assigned. So I grabbed the boarding passes and marched down the aisle to the flight attendant. And he says, well, I have to deal with the back of the plane. So I go back to, he said, hang on, I'll get there. So I just took it over. People are yelling. Beth from New York in particular was yelling and spitting in my face. And it's very hot because, it's stressed, everybody's stressed out and the plane temperature just keeps rising. So I just reassign all the seats and redo all of the seats around me. So we get into the air and the flight attendant comes up to me while we're in the air and leans down and says, can I ask you a question? And I said, sure. And he said, are you a hostage negotiator? And now you do not want to be asked if you're a hostage negotiator while you're on a plane, right? Like, this is not a good thing. And I said, no, why? And he said, well, because what you did was amazing. I've never seen anybody do that before. And I realized what he was talking about. And when the plane landed, Beth from New York came up, kissed me on both cheeks, and hugged me. So And there's a lot of reasons that I was able to do that in that stressful situation. And part of that was learning how to handle stress. But most of that was executive presence and just being able to think. I actually thought as I was marching down the aisle, how do I want to show up? How do I want to show up if this ends up on YouTube? And just some of these things I'm talking about, setting intentions, being open to feedback, those sorts of things really have made a huge difference for me. And I hope that they can make a difference for you too, now that I know how powerful they can be. So I hope you'll check out those additional materials Dana's going to send. I hope you'll reach out if you want somebody to look over your impact statement, and that you'll consider how you might improve your executive presence, because it's made an enormous difference for me. And I hope that it can for you too.
Thanks again, Amy. If anybody has any questions, throw them up in the chat. We'll keep it open for a couple more minutes. In the meantime, Amy and I can just chit-chat a little bit more about this subject. And then if there are no questions, we'll conclude. We just want to give everyone a chance.
And if you do have that moment where you think on Tuesday, like, wait, what was that she said? You can always email me. Like, it's, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. It's amy@apochromatik.com.
I was just going to say, let me type that right into the chat in case anybody wants to write it down.
There should be a...
Well, speaking of apochromatic, what is that word?
Yes. So we get that a lot. It's hysterical, the number of podcasts I've been on where the person is always like, Amy from, and then there's like a long pause. Right? So as a former IP litigator, I felt it was very important that we get the trademark on whatever the name was before we launched our business. And we had a name that we really liked and then could not get the trademark on. So I was frustrated and told my husband, I don't care what the name is, just figure it out. And he's a really avid photographer. So he came back with Apochromatik, and I was like, I have no idea what that means. But he got me to agree to it because an apochromatic lens, it turns out, is one that helps you eliminate distortion so that you can focus.
Oh, that's great.
Because that's really, a lot of times clients come to us and just everything is crazy, right? They have no space to focus on what they want out of their career because everything else is sapping their energy. And so we help them focus and eliminate distortions. But in order to get the trademark, we changed the spelling. It's usually C at the end. But given that Keith's name starts with K, we changed the C to a K and then have the A. So if you look at the logo, the A and the K are different colors than the rest of it. But yeah, that's how we ended up.
That's a really fantastic story. I did not know that. I'm not familiar with the term, the jargon, but now that I know the story, I think that's really a great story.
Yeah, so if you're looking for us on LinkedIn or on Facebook or whatever, it's Apochromatik. On Instagram, it's _Apochromatik, because somehow someone else got Apochromatik with a K at the end before we did. But
go figure.
Anyway, yeah.
Nancy asked, what is your thought on swearing? A well-placed swear word that has impact at the moment. Is that a no-go? So
when I was an associate at Skadden, I worked with this partner who he would always swear and then apologize to me. And so I went to a female partner and said, what do I do about this? Because he always does this. And she said, I think you need to swear. And so then I started swearing and probably took it a little farther than I needed to. But I do think that it depends on the audience. If I was working with a group of ministers, say, I probably wouldn't swear. But I do think that it can help you build rapport. So if you're with a client or someone who swears or opposing counsel who swears, it can make sense to drop that in there. And I think it can be more authentic, right? So when I was like starting swearing at 28 or whatever, it probably didn't come across as particularly authentic, and it probably made me look like a weirdo. But if it is something that you do normally and it's just part of who you are, I think it can be fine, just as long as you know your audience in the setting. Like I wouldn't do that in the middle of a Seventh Circuit oral argument. But in other situations, it can be helpful. I had opposing counsel once who would scream and swear, and I had no idea what to do. And then I worked with a counsel who he had small children. And so what he would do is say, I can see that you're upset. Why don't you take a minute, calm down, and let me know when you're ready to proceed. And it would just take the air out of the room. So you don't always want to match the crazy. I think sometimes it can be more helpful to just back up and let it be obvious that they're in this situation themselves and you're not going into their nonsense. But other times I think it can be effective.
Interesting. Okay, well, it looks like that's a wrap.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us on a Friday afternoon, and please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and check out the assessment so that you can see where how your executive presence stacks up.